right, guys. Looks like we're all seated. So I mean, in 2018, it looks like proof of work is still the dominant consensus model. I'm curious if you guys think if we meet back here again in 2019, is that still going to be the case?
I think actually when I talk with a couple like crypto friends, I personally feel like 2018 going to be the year of proof of stake. So it's going to be huge because as you can tell, like even like the last session, the quantum, they use proof of stake, which works pretty well. And besides of that, for myself, I think there are more blockchains or other like dApps, they are actually using proof of stake to incentive user to govern the whole like system or platform itself. Like Bodhi, we are using a token and utilize, like build something like similar like proof of stake to make sure the system works itself without like centralized control.
Yeah. I have take investigation about the top 100 cryptocurrencies. In fact, it's partly true about you saying in the top 10 or top 20 cryptocurrencies, the POW is still the dominant. But if we say the top 15, the not mining consensus will be the dominant. I think it's interesting. Although in our Byton blockchain, it focuses on assets aspect. So it focuses on it needs more security and more safe. We use POW. But we say the technologies always continue to progress. I don't think POW, POS, or PBFT, or Tendermint, or some kind consensus algorithm could dominate for all the times. Yeah.
Sure. So I don't know what will happen in 2018 regarding proof of stake. Just with respect to what should happen. Proof of work is very easy to understand, to analyze when you construct a system. There's block creation rate is very, very simple mathematical property. Proof of stake and governs the system by incentives, and incentives are very interactable to analyze. So I think maybe local communities, maybe small blockchains can use proof of stake. But if you want a really, really big and scalable system, which with many use cases, then you'll have to trust that you designed the incentive scheme very good. And I don't think in regular economies or in blockchain economies, you can trust yourself with that power.
Yeah, I think for network get to the consensus also include the security liveness. Previously, it's the POW, like the major chain, Bitcoin and the Ethereum. Ethereum has gradually moved to the POW, POS paradigm, eventually phase out the POW. There's a lot of the POS coins there. It initially has some issues with like nothing at stake issue, and of course that was fixed somehow by slashing condition, kind of introduced in Casper. So get back to the question about if 2018 is a POS. I think I agree with Mr. Duan here. It really depends on the situation, the use case. Certain use case is really good if you're using POS. Certain is POW, and there is also like in the enterprise world, there's SGX. Use basically the POET, proof elapsed time, right? It's by Intel. And also there's some innovations in various areas. One thing is, I think in Silicon Valley, there's a company called Zero Chain. They're using BFT, multiple dimensional BFT, trying to kind of reach a sub-second finality. So those are the innovation. I think this year will be a year of innovation in terms of a consensus, also in terms of security. Security, when we're talking about the consensus mainly is really to guarantee the security. So it's have a finality there, right? As most of you know, POW, it's not really a settlement. It cannot really reach settlement finality deterministically. It can reach it like a right, using the probability. So maybe 90%, as the chain grows, then it's become more deterministic. So there is some areas in the security, like identity management. That's why, as my company, I'm advising a few startups. One is the key.com, the key.vip. They recently closed a very good round of the ICO and private sale. It's really focused on the identity piece, including the key management.
So this question's for Jonathan. I'm curious, like, what do you think proof of work gets you that proof of stake doesn't get you, that makes it more suitable for these large-scale billion-dollar, trillion-dollar public bets?
Well, there's a conservation of difficulty rule when you design a protocol with incentives, and even just generally a consensus protocol. Then you find a good solution. Proof of stake seems like no energy consumption, supposedly it's like more economic. But then it's too good to be true. So you kind of analyze the system, and then you find some problem. For instance, it began with nothing at stake problem. Then you kind of patch it. Then you feel good with yourself, and then after a few months, you find another problem, and then you kind of push always the difficulty to somewhere else in the system. And the reader of your white paper or of your Reddit channel gets confused. Where did you nail it? So I'm not sure. I would like 2018 to be a year of innovation and consensus, because it's really easy to screw up a consensus protocol, and it's also really easy to come up with a protocol that works almost always. So almost always my protocol works. And if you're more exposed like to computer science courses on consensus, you get, this is maybe the first or second week of the lesson of the course, you get counterexamples.
Yeah, so if I can comment on this.
Yeah.
So yeah, basically we are dealing with like highly distributed environment, right? So there is maybe some of you know there's a theory called FLP, impossibility theory. It's like in distributed network, if it's asynchronous, under this condition, if there's only one single node is failed, you cannot reach a consensus. So that's called the FLP impossibility. How can you circumvent it? So you have to make some assumptions. POW has assumption also based on you have the majority of nodes who are honest, which is 51%. POS, most of POS algorithm also based on this majority honest algorithm, right? So I think there's some of the innovation, maybe not from industry, some of the research. Yesterday, Yuna, Eric are in Stanford, right? There's lots of academia. They are talking about some innovations, some in the consensus, some in other security area. So I think that's good to have some dispute, right? So I think maybe not just 2018. It's a continue. There is innovation in the consensus, in particular, and also in broad blockchain technology, right? That's why I'm very interested. I ask lots of questions in Stanford academia. I think I'm the one who asked the most questions last 2 days in Stanford, right? So I'm naturally interested in the innovation. So anyway, so to just short, I think going forward, it's 2018 or 2019, the innovation in the consensus and also in the security will push the blockchain forward.
Cool.
So maybe last comment on that.
Yeah, please.
This is an important distinction you made. Satoshi Nakamoto's model was 51% honest, meaning altruistic. They're not considering it within their profit, just honest. And 49% Byzantine adversarial strategic. And proof of stake and many other protocols that are based on incentives, of course, are more appealing because we all can play with incentives. We understand it better. But it's much, much more difficult to deal with incentive. I won't repeat that. But the protocols that I develop and we develop in the Hebrew University and in DAG Labs stick to the Satoshi's model. 49% Byzantine, 51% honest, altruistic. I'm not saying this is the best model, not the most economic one, but this is the most understandable one and the most tractable one.
So I think you brought up an interesting point, which is that the legibility and the understandability of these models is actually pretty important. And I think anyone that disagrees with that should just look at the amount of money that we've lost this year to pretty simple bugs, in multi-sig contracts or whatever. So I'd like to hear from you guys, what do you think the biggest misconceptions about consensus models are?
I think, for me, I think there are two. So for one, blockchain level, right now so many blockchains are coming out. Some of them still use POW, the classical one, and some of them use a new consensus algorithms. I totally support more innovations in the new consensus protocols, personally. But in terms of proof of work, I feel like there's a misunderstanding about should we actually have many proof of work blockchain or having couple ones, especially Bitcoin will be a dominant proof of work. I support there should be as few POW blockchain as possible. Why? Because as you can tell, POW require a lot of mining power. And in these words, we have fixed supply of mining power. So if you have too many proof of work blockchain, that means all those blockchain are not secure enough because you can always having you are threatened to having suddenly have more mining power from one party to the other.
What about ASICs?
Well, same thing. Even if ASICs, it will be limited. So if you have too many ASIC proof of work blockchains, then they will compete each other. That means all of them are not secure enough. So that's something I hope proof of work will be being dominant by some of the few great blockchain and don't have too many POW-based blockchain. And second thing about this consensus protocols misunderstanding for me is right now so many people are talking about consensus on chain, for blockchain, but nobody talk about consensus on the DApp, decentralized application built on top of the blockchain. Ethereum or Quantum provide this something called smart contracts so that everyone can build application on top of blockchain. And so a lot of people write some codes, create an application and saying, oh, we are now a decentralized application. But most of them are not because why? They are a lot of time they are controlled by a single company. They have single point of failure. They are not actually a decentralized just because they are building on top of blockchain. I think it's a misunderstanding. For Bodhi, we truly believe to become a truly decentralized application, you should have an on-chain protocol. Let's govern the whole application itself by token holders. Instead of still you have this token distributed to millions of users. However, the application itself is still controlled by the project owner, which is not a decentralized application to my definition. So I think these two misunderstandings, I feel it would be some very something will be being paying attention in this year, and I think people will realize not every application built on top of blockchain going to be decentralized by definition. Yeah.
What about you, Sensei? What do you think?
I think one of the misunderstanding about consensus is we treat it as a pure technical issue. But I think in the blockchain world or blockchain economic consensus is more about political or economical issues, such as POW and POS. For example, in POS system, you should have some tokens you can vote, and you vote, then decide the network's topology. And the network topology is and decides who hold how much and how many tokens, and then it's make a dead circle. So it's not very friendly for the newcomers. If someone or some developer want to be bad or want to be evil, he can easily control the whole blockchain network. That's truth about POS. So we have DPoS, but DPoS also have some defects. It's not only about the technical side. So I think when we design a consensus algorithm, we should not only consider the technical side, we should consider more about the economical side and the incentive side, how to encourage more community members, developers, or validators, also we call miners, to participate in this ecosystem to make it grow health. That's my understanding.
So you asked what's the biggest misconception in consensus protocols. I think it's more efficient to discuss the conceptions, right? Because there are more misconceptions than conceptions out there. And maybe we should discuss why there are misconceptions. So of course there are deliberate ones, right? But most of all, I think what happens in blockchain is that a team comes up with a project, with a new project, right? So they need a consensus layer. So they design a consensus layer, and then they need other layers. So they just design a solution for every layer, which is unique and novel, maybe in a bad way, maybe in a good way, but it's novel. And then you have this many components in the same project, tied to the same brand, and users or community members have no idea and no ability to distinguish between them. So maybe I'll give a few examples from my field, but I guess in proof of stake or proof of work, in that respect, there's many others. So for instance, Ethereum mentioned in the white paper, they're implementing our Ghost protocol. I co-authored it with Aviv Zohar in the Hebrew University. And whether they implement it or not, it's an interesting story, but aside of that point, Ghost is a very marginal aspect of Ethereum, right? Ethereum's main invention is the EVM. Yeah. So, when people tell me, oh, you implemented Ghost in Ethereum, then I said, first of all, forget about Ghost in Ethereum, but mainly, yeah, but it doesn't mean I know smart contracts. It doesn't mean there's any connection between these two systems. Right. And maybe another point that's very close to my field, I've been developing block DAG protocols for several years now. So people think DAG protocols are like users mining their own transactions, are like systems where there are no blocks and maybe no miners. This is utterly wrong. There's no connection between DAG and users mining their own transactions. Now, the latter can be a good idea or a bad idea. I'm not a big fan of that idea, but either case, there's no connection between block DAG protocols and users mining their own transactions. The only reason people tie them together is because IOTA and Byteball incidentally use these two components in the same system, which again is legitimate, but it doesn't mean that these projects are about block DAGs. They are not, and their use of DAG is very marginal in their entire system.
Yeah. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree. So my thinking is you're asking about the misconception between these two, right? For the people who really look at the surface, there's maybe some misconception, but essentially we have to solve is really to reach the agreement on the transactions, or reach the settlement finality. There's so many different algorithms, so which one is the best, we still don't know. And to be honest, there's certainly not, the problem is not solved. This is why from my own point is blockchain technology is really an evolutionary technology. Although the idea itself behind it is revolutionary as a business model. So eventually the business model will lead the technology evolution with it. That's my idea.
So something we've talked about a lot is this idea that there's sort of no free lunch, and that within consensus you're going to make these trade-offs between liveness and security and performance. But I'm curious, there are some technologies kind of on the horizon that look like they might be a free lunch in some sense. I mean, stuff like you have ZK Starks, you have these hybrid models. And so I'm curious, what do you think the sort of low-hanging fruit is out there for free lunch upgrades to the consensus protocol layer?
For me, I think, so for example, I personally really like what Zcash has, that zero knowledge proof to make, like, bring the anonymity to this blockchain. So they basically bring the anonymity to the whole blockchain level. And there's some other like project like, for example, NewCipher, they try to enable this anonymity based on the public chain. Basically, even though, like public blockchain, like Bitcoin or Ethereum, every transaction is readable and verifiable on-chain by anyone. So there's no like security, privacy. So some of like protocol will enable this, even though you are able to read the data on public blockchain, but they are encrypted. And so I think they are all very like interesting exploration to like not just building a like counter-attacking protocol from people try to break down this network, but also protect the data which is being recorded on blockchain, which is, I think is a great way. And some other project I want to mention, like Filecoin, which is a very like a famous community project, but they haven't released the Filecoin or the consensus they claim on the white paper. But I imagine when that comes out, it will be a big thing, because that's not just a new chain for like sharing, but also it actually improved the usage of like the bandwidth and the storage on almost every computer. I think if you count from the cost and the cost, or like how much it will reuse those unused storage on your computer, it's a huge market. So it's not just about the chain itself, it's actually about the value for the real world. So some of those I think which is very valuable, and it's really like worth to explore and have a try. Yeah.
From my point of view, I think there is two aspects about consensus. One is correctness. For example, that the validator should validate whether a transaction, a smart contract executed correctly as the original purpose. The second one is consistency. That means if this transaction or smart contracts record should be recorded in a global database among the chain, or only in part of the blockchains, I think it may need the trade-off may be needed, and we can't choose to not face this issue. Yeah.
Jonathan, do you see any kind of unexplored low-hanging fruit or free lunch in the consensus game?
I don't think there is some free lunch, and I see some interesting cases such as Gavin Wood's Polkadot. Their consensus also, but his choice is just to make some, like in my point of view, it's just more centralized to like the generate blocks power to the bridge chains. Yeah.
Jonathan, what do you think?
So I'm very happy that you mentioned the no free lunch theorem, although we all heard about it. We kind of need to be reminded of it constantly. I think the question, before I get to the free lunch, just to give a preface, we focus a lot about the free market, transaction fee market, and this is only focusing on what mechanism payment transfers, value transfers should be between miners and users, which is very important. But more important is the cost of a transaction to the system. This is the main trade-off, not how much the user pays, rather how much burden does a user transaction impose on the system, right? So you can call your system feeless, okay, and say we have 0 fees, but the question is not how much users pay, but how much cost their transactions impose. And in that respect, I think there are low-hanging fruits, but they are not trustless. I think we should utilize much more the trust that exists between users or between users and service providers or their apps, to the extent that users do trust some entities to some extent, and we should be very careful to define in what respect. To be online, to not cheat, to I don't know, there's many versions of trust. But to the extent that users do trust entities, we should utilize it to decrease the cost of the transaction on the entire system. Once we do that, we can come with much more efficient blockchains.
That's a really interesting idea. So the idea is that we shouldn't be absolutist in how our trust model looks, that we should have some levels of nuance within each protocol.
Well, yes, before blockchain, trust was a positive word. Suddenly, trustlessness became a virtue. It's like, are we seriously going for a movement that just bullishes on the notion of trust? So trust should be a choice who to trust. That's for sure a very positive part of this movement, of this revolution. But destroying any notion and eliminating any trust from the system as an option for a user to communicate. You and I trust each other. Why should we communicate through other, through other parties and impose such a big cost on the system? I think that's a low-hanging fruit, and it also depends on our ability to recover the positive connotation of the word trust.
Yeah, trust has become a bad word.
Yeah.
Cool. Ken, you mentioned SGX, which I think is an interesting angle. Do you see like systems like that as providing low-hanging fruit for consensus?
What do you say, SG? Oh, hash graph?
SGX, or like these kind of
Oh, the
trusted
SGX,
modules.
the Intel, the SGX,
Yeah.
the secure guard extension. This is just they built in their trusted execution environment. So you basically don't need to do the POW per se. You just wait on the random time, and then you just prove that you waited on this time. So you prove elapsed time, but time is a random generation generated by the trusted execution environment. So that's the idea. But I think another thing is when you're talking about the low-hanging fruit, there's a few angles to it. Right? One is really you can do it for free in terms of POW. Another is you can leverage existing technology. Don't do too much research. And you can do, I don't know in which angle you ask. I was just debating. Like if there's existing research already done, like I think it's a hash graph. I think that's hash graph, right? They leverage a technology called asynchronous BFT long time ago, right? And put it with the gospel protocol using so-called the gospel trying to reach the sub-second settlement finality. Of course, there is also problem potentially with that. I don't want to critique it, but there's lots of, I think if we dig deeper, maybe we can find some research a long time ago we can potentially leverage. Like Bitcoin. Bitcoin is not everything from scratch. It's actually has something there, right? So yeah, BFT is the same thing. So I think maybe it's a two angle to your question.
Okay.
Right.
So I could talk about consensus all day,
Right.
but it looks like we're about out of time. So thanks a lot for coming up.
Thanks
Great
for having us.
speaking.
Thank you.